over 50 years now, boys and girls and mums and dads have read and reread Kenneth Grahame's magical story of Mr. Toad and his friends Ratty, Mole and Badger. 4 animals who were sometimes so stupid and sometimes so wise that they were just like human beings. For those who've not yet had the pleasure of their company, and for the thousands who'd like to meet them again, this is the story of The Wind in the Willows. All summer long, the mole had stayed with his friend, the water rat. The mole who'd been so timid and overawed by river life at first, he hadn't known how to row a boat, how to swim, who to talk to and who not to talk to. But now he had the hang of all these things. You see, not only was the pace of life different on the riverbank from the lonely life the mole had known underground, but there was a certain riverside etiquette which can't be described in words. It was something that you picked up as you went along, and the mole had done just that. And as summer passed into autumn and the leaves fell from the trees, a rich golden mellowness set in along the river bank, and the mole still stayed on, quite accepted by everyone on the river. Eventually came the winter, when the water ran so fast and high that boating was out of the question, and swimming was just a memory from the warm summer days that had passed. In the winter, nothing very much happened on the river. In fact, most of the residents slept a good deal, and when they woke, they'd call on each other and compare notes on the past summer and all its doings. They'd then have tea together by glorious blazing fires before setting off home again and going to sleep once more to dream of the Prince of Spring who'd kiss that sleeping summer back to life, so that the whole round of sun-kissed adventures could begin once more. And these were just the thoughts that were going through Rat's mind one cold winter afternoon as he sat before the fire, snug and content. He'd been there for hours, writing down rhymes on a paper on his lap and saying more poetry things to himself until at last he dozed off to sleep. "I say, Ratty," said the mole from the other fireside chair. "Hey, what is it?" said the rat, waking up with a start. "I was just wondering," said the mole. "One often hears a lot about Badger on the river. Everyone seems to respect him, but he never shows himself. I've only seen him once, and briefly, on the day of our first picnic. Why don't we invite him round for dinner or something? Or perhaps even go to his house and look him up?" "Oh, I'm afraid that dinners, invitations and social occasions are not in Badger's line of country at all," said the rat. "And as for visiting him, he lives right in the middle of the wild wood, so that's right out of the question." It wasn't the first time that Rat had said this about Badger or the wild wood, and it made the mole very curious. He'd often wanted to find out more about Badger. And as the rat composed himself once more for a snooze, the mole decided that perhaps he'd go off on his own and look at this wild wood that nobody went near, and perhaps he might even meet Badger himself. So, leaving the rat now fast asleep, he tiptoed out of the room. It was a cold, still afternoon, with a hard, steely sky overhead as he set off. Copses, dells, quarries, and all hidden places, which had been mysterious mines for exploration in summer, were now exposed. But to the mole it was exhilarating. So with great spirits he pushed on towards the wild wood, which lay before him, low and threatening, like a black reef in some still southern sea. There was nothing to alarm him at first. Twigs crackled under his feet and logs tripped him, but all that was fun and exciting. He penetrated on to where the light was less, and trees crouched nearer and nearer. Everything was very still now. The dusk advanced on him steadily, rapidly, gathering in behind and before, and the light seemed to be draining away like floodwater. Then the faces began. It was over his shoulder and indistinctly that he thought he first saw a face. A little evil wedge-shaped face, looking out at him from a hole. When he turned and confronted it, the thing had vanished. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there'd simply be no end to it. And then, yes, Certainly a little narrow face with hard eyes had flashed up for an instant from a hole and was gone. He hesitated, braced himself for an effort, and strode on. Then suddenly, in every hole, far and near, there were hundreds of faces, all hard-eyed and evil and sharp. If he could only get away from the holes in the bank, he thought, there'd be no more faces. So he swung off the path and he plunged into the untrodden places of the wood. Then the whistling began. Very faint and shrill it was, and far behind him, or was it in front? But it made him hurry. And then it grew louder and became very frightening. He was alone and unarmed, and the night was closing in. Then the pattering began. He thought it was only falling leaves at first. Then as it grew, he knew it for nothing else but the pat, pat, pat of little feet. It grew and multiplied from every quarter and seemed to be closing in on him. Then a rabbit came running hard towards him through the trees. It dashed past with a set face and staring eyes. "Get out of this, you fool," the mole heard him mutter as he made for a friendly burrow. And now the whole wood seemed to be running hard, hunting, chasing, closing in round something or somebody. And in panic, the mole too began to run. Aimlessly, he knew not whither. He ran up against things, he fell over things and into things, and at last threw himself into the deep, dark hollow of an old beech tree, which offered shelter, concealment, perhaps even safety. But who could tell? And as he lay there, panting and trembling, he knew at last that dreadful thing from which the rat had vainly tried to shield him. The terror of the wild wood. Meanwhile, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozed by his fireside. His paper of half-finished verses had slipped from his knee, and as he snoozed, he wandered by the verdant banks of dream rivers. Then a coal slipped from the fire, and he woke with a start. He looked round for the mole, but the mole wasn't there. He listened for a time, but the house seemed very quiet. "Moley!" he called, but there was no reply. "Moley, are you there?" But again, no answer. He went into the hall. Missing from its accustomed peg was the mole's cap, and his galoshes were also gone. Then looking round, he saw that the front door was open, and there on the muddy surface of the ground, he saw the mole's tracks, a line of imprints leading straight and purposeful, direct to the wild wood. With dark, menacing clouds in the sky and dusk setting in, the rat plunged without hesitation into the wood. Tucked into his belt, a brace of pistols. In his hand, a short, stout cudgel. He looked anxiously on either side of him for any sign of his friend. And though at first he heard a whistling and a pattering from behind, it soon died away, for it was plain for anyone to see that the rat was set on a manful task and was prepared for anything. "Moley! Moley!" he called as he traversed the wood in the gathering gloom. "Moley, where are you? It's me, old Rat." He must have kept up his searching and calling for an hour or more, when at last, from a hollow beneath an old beech tree, a timid little voice called out, "Ratty! Ratty, is that really you?" The rat crept into the hollow, and there he found the mole, exhausted and still trembling. "Oh, Rat," he cried, "I've been so frightened you can't think." "Oh, I quite understand," said the rat soothingly. "You shouldn't really have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it. There are 100 things one has to know about coming to the wood. Passwords and signs and sayings which have power and effect. You've got to know them if you're small, or you'll find yourself in trouble. Anyway, we ought to start for home now. It'd never do to spend the night here." "Oh, dear Ratty," said the mole imploringly, "I'm simply dead beat, and that's a fact. You must let me rest a while to get my strength back, if I'm to get home at all." And so the understanding rat sat down at the mouth of the little hollow, still with a pistol in his hand, and kept guard, while the mole, having covered himself with dry leaves, dozed off. It was then that the snow began to fall. It collected on the branches of trees and on the undergrowth. Holes, hollows, pools, and pitfalls vanished fast, and a gleaming white carpet was springing up everywhere. Down in the hollow of the old beech tree, the rat, who'd allowed the mole to sleep for quite a while, stuck his head out, and when he saw the snow, called out, Come on, Mole, old chap, wake up. It's snowing. We must make a move for home. An hour or two later, they'd lost all count of time, and they pulled up, dispirited and completely lost. They regained their breath and considered what action to take. Well, there's only one thing to do, said the Rat. We'll make for that little dell down there and see if we can find some shelter. Something with a dry floor and out of the wind. We can then rest a while and have another go at getting home when we feel a little stronger. It was in the dell that the Mole suddenly tripped up and fell on his face in the snow. "Oh, my leg, my poor leg," he cried. But the Rat was staring down at what the Mole had tripped over. And when the Mole looked too, he saw to his astonishment, of all things, a door scraper revealed in the snow. The Rat frantically shoveled at the snow, and then, I thought so, he cried. "Here's a doormat. Pretty scruffy it is, but it's a doormat." The Mole really couldn't understand what on earth the Rat was talking about. But as he sat nursing his leg, the Rat suddenly disappeared in a flurry of white as the snow on all sides of him collapsed, and he lay worn out, but with a happy grin slowly spreading all over his little face. There, where the snow had been, was a solid little door. Beside it, a bell pull, and above it, in large lettering, were the words, Mr. Badger. It's hard to describe the immense relief felt by both the animals. It seemed that they'd been saved a fate they dared not think about. The Mole, forgetting all about his bruised leg, leapt into the air to clutch at the bell pull, and as he swung with both feet off the ground, they both heard from quite a long way off a deep-toned bell pealing in response. In episode 6, the Mole at long last meets Mr. Badger.